Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Ernesto Burden. I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review. It's my pleasure to welcome you to what is going to be, I think, a fascinating discussion on New Hampshire's housing crisis. We'll be looking at some insights from some true experts, data, and some solutions. As we note in the text here, the housing market is cooling off in some parts of the country. That's not what we're seeing here in New Hampshire. We have a severe shortage of housing. It's a topic that's high on everybody's list. And as noted by our turnout today, which is probably one of our highest turnouts that we've ever seen for a webinar. So thank you for being here. Let's thank you to our sponsor, New Hampshire Housing, and to our speakers. Today, we're going to be hearing from two panelists, and we'll be following that up with a Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A function. Our speakers are Julie Jussif, Managing Director of New Hampshire Housing's Homeownership Division, and Bob Quinn, the Chief Executive Officer of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors. We're going to hear from Julie first, and then she will invite Bob up, and then I will return at the end to moderate a Q&A with both panelists. So Julie, welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Ernesto. Good morning, everyone. As Ernesto mentioned, I am Julie Jussif. I'm the Managing Director of our Homeownership Division at New Hampshire Housing. I'm very pleased to be part of this event. So today I'm going to be talking to you about housing data, which includes the housing landscape, a review of our rental cost survey, and an overview of our housing needs assessment and some solutions for navigating through this difficult time. So I am going to share my screen. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. I assume you can all see this, so I'll jump right in. Okay. So first I'm going to talk about who New Hampshire Housing is and what we do. New Hampshire Housing was established by state law in 1981 as a self-supporting state public corporation. We manage a wide range of programs that advance our mission to promote, finance, and support housing solutions from the people for the people of New Hampshire. Some of the programs that we run are funded with federal dollars or state dollars. However, we do not receive any operating funds from the state, and we are also not state employees. We are governed by a 9-member board of directors that are appointed by the governor. Through the help of our partners, we have been able to help 55,000 families purchase a home of their own. We've been able to provide financing for over 16,000 multifamily units, and we provided direct assistance to tens of thousands of households across the state of New Hampshire. Just last year, we were able to finance over 1,800 multifamily rental housing units, and we were able to help over 1,000 families purchase a home. So to get started, I'm going to give you an overview of the housing landscape in New Hampshire. And the first data point we have is the housing type structures in New Hampshire. There's a 2010 to a 2020 comparison, so a 10-year time frame between the two charts. And what you'll see is that they're essentially the same. And so over 60% of the housing units in New Hampshire are single-family detached homes. And these types of homes are great for when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and you have a family, or you're able-bodied to mow the lawn and shovel yourself out of a snowstorm, but it is less great as you age and you are unable to do those chores. And so a lot of the housing is single-family detached, and then we have a variety of other housing. 17% is made up of condos, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and then the remaining 15% is our multifamily housing. So as you go through life and age, your housing needs are going to change, and the lack of diversity stock in our state makes it difficult to make those transitions. So next I want to touch upon the single family inventory. So single family homes for sale in the state of New Hampshire. And I'm not going to talk too much about these because Bob is going to go into detail. But when we look at inventory, we look at the absorption rate. And so what this chart is telling us is how many months would it take to absorb all of the inventory that is currently for sale using the prior 12 months of sales data. So if no new homes were to come on the market, how long would it take to absorb all of the active listings? And what the data is telling us is that it would take 0.8 months, so less than 1 month to absorb all of the active listings. So that's not even a full month. So extremely low inventory. What we are told is that a balanced market is 6 months. So we're at 0.8 and a balanced market would be at 6 months. So it is a seller's market, no surprise there. Some of our data, I do want to mention that some of our data is going to be a little bit different from the realtor data, some of our numbers, and the reason being we use the same data source, but we are filtering out some of the data like seasonal homes, cottages, cash only transaction, age restricted properties, because we're trying to view this data through the lens of a first-time home buyer. Okay, so inventory is low, demand's high. Let's take a look at the median sales price. Prices are still high. So the median sales price for July was $440,000. So again, this is going to vary slightly from realtor data just because of those filters. This is up 13% from 2 years ago and up 6% from last year. So price growth is not really slowing down. Bear with me here. And that's despite what we were told. So we were told when interest rates start climbing, then our home values are going to start coming down. Well, we really haven't experienced that. Headlines are telling us that we are experiencing the highest interest rates that we've seen in 22 years. So they're not as high as we saw in the 80s, as our boomer friends like to remind us, but they're still pretty high. This chart looks at a 13-year time frame. And Freddie Mac just last week had listed their average 30-year conventional fixed rate mortgage at a 7.23%. It is a very uncertain time for lending. A lot of banks have pulled out of lending. There's a lot of liquidity challenges in the market. There's supply and demand issues with the mortgage-backed security market. And there's a lot of risk out there of prepayments. And so all of these factors make it extremely difficult to price mortgages. So what does it mean for the future of interest rates? Well, I am no longer predicting what's going to happen with interest rates because I have been so wrong over the past 10 years. So I would say your guess is as good as mine, but I think these high interest rates are going to be with us for a while. So how do these high interest rates impact mortgage payments? Well, they impact them a lot. So this chart shows you what your mortgage payment would be on a $400,000 home at the different interest rates. But in comparing a 3% interest rate to a 7% interest rate, you can expect to add about $1,000 every single month to your mortgage payment for that higher interest rate. So it's not really a surprise to see that there's been a shift in the demographics over a 10-year period between owners and renters. Our incomes are growing in the state of New Hampshire. Our population is aging. Fewer of our working population is becoming homeowners, and there are less families with children. Our working population, which is defined as people from the age of 25 to 64 years old, that population has declined, but our jobs have increased. Hence why everyone is looking for employees. So the working population, again, 25 to 64 years old, is increasingly more likely to rent than they are to own. And so we have seen declines in our homeownership rates. So this chart shows you homeownership rates by age in these different age brackets. And so what we can see, the working population decline, decline, decline with 2020 data. So it's not fun to be a homeowner. Let's take a look at our rental market. Every year, our team surveys thousands of owners of market rate rental housing units. We survey about 17,000 of them across the state as part of our rental cost survey, and the data represents about 11% of the overall market. According to our 2023 rental cost survey, which is available on our website, the median gross for a two-bedroom unit in New Hampshire is almost $1,800. This is an increase of 11.4% over last year, and it represents a 40% increase in the past 5 years. Every single county in the state of New Hampshire has seen significant rent increases, some more than others. For instance, Grafton County. We're also starting to see median renter income increase. That's because people and families that would have been likely to purchase a home can no longer purchase a home due to affordability issues. We also have an extremely low vacancy rate. So 0.6% vacancy rate, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And this vacancy rate makes it extremely challenging for lower income borrowers, disabled populations, and the populations on fixed income. They're at a severe disadvantage with this dynamic. Again, just taking a look at median gross rental income, median gross rent for the state of New Hampshire for a two-bedroom in comparison to all units. We can see pretty steady rent increases since 2014, and these rent amounts include utilities. So big increases hovering around 40% over a 5-year time period. Vacancy remains extremely, extremely low for our rental units. To put this into context, a 5% vacancy is considered a balanced market. And so we haven't seen 5% vacancy since before 2014. And so what this means is that if you're going to find an apartment to rent in New Hampshire, it's going to take some networking, persistence, and a whole lot of luck. And before we get into the housing needs assessment, I want to talk about the population growth, because this is the main component of the housing needs forecast. So New Hampshire, the population peaked in the 70s and the 80s, and we've seen some steady population growth. And what we are projecting is that that population growth will continue until 2040, where we'll start to see a decline. The decline is where the deaths start outpacing births and net in migration. So we should expect to see growth, population growth through 2040. What's important to realize is the brackets of where this growth is coming from. So I once heard it referred to as the gray tsunami. And so that is what's coming for New Hampshire. 65 and older, that population is going to increase as people begin to age in our state. So to recap, we have low inventory, low vacancy, high demand. We have a growing population. So now I want to dive into some of the key highlights of our statewide housing need assessment. This assessment, again, is available on our website. It was conducted by Root Policy Research. We do this assessment about once every 10 years. The document goes into great detail. It's about 248 pages long, I think, but there's an excellent 8 or 10 page executive summary that is easy reading. So what did the data tell us? We would need 24,000 units today to address our housing needs. 24,000 units. And based on estimated population growth, we'll need 60,000 units by 2030, and we'll need 90,000 units by 2040. So it seems like a lot of units. Well, let's take a look at the data to see how we're doing towards those goals. So the best data that we have to estimate new units coming onto the market is permit data. So this chart demonstrates building trends in New Hampshire since 1980. And you can see we peaked our building activity in the 80s. It peaked again in the early 2000s. It slowed down in the recession, and it really hasn't gained much since the recession. Over the past 4 years, we've been averaging around 4,000 unit permits per year. So if you multiply 4,000 by the 10-year time span of the housing needs assessment, you'll get 40,000 units. And if you multiply it by the 20-year time span, you'll get 80,000. So I'm going to flip back to the previous slide. So we'll be short based on current permit data of our housing needs. What these numbers don't account for is second homes. So many of these properties that are being built will be used for second homes. And so if we were to factor in a number for second homes, we would need to add anywhere from 14,000 to 23,000 to these numbers right here. So looking at permit data, you will probably notice that there's a lot of blue on this screen. So blue are single family units. And the units that are being built, the single family units, are not starter homes. So very rarely do you see a new construction property that's under $500,000. So all homes are good homes, but it may not be the housing that we need. So what are the impediments to housing development? Well, they all happen to start with the letter L. So lumber, the cost of development is extremely high right now. Labor shortages is a real thing in New Hampshire. Land shortage is a thing in New Hampshire. Loans, it's extremely expensive to borrow. And laws and regulatory practices, which I'll go into. So this is just a kind of a recap. The challenges that we're experiencing in New Hampshire: rising home prices, increasing rents, low inventory. We have a mismatch of housing stock for a changing demographic, and we also have local resistance to housing development. National challenges: we have high interest rate, we have supply chain issues, and increased cost in building material. So some of the major efforts and shift in New Hampshire in the housing market can be seen on this slide. And so there's a lot here, and a lot has been done, and a lot has been done just recently. And these things take time. Policy takes time to have an impact. So this slide is very dense, and my time is somewhat limited. So I'm going to just touch upon a few that New Hampshire Housing has been closely involved with, and some that have been getting some good press. So, all right, the ones I'm going to talk about are highlighted. New Hampshire invested $100 million into Invest NH funds, of which New Hampshire Housing received $5 million for the Housing Opportunity and Planning grants. With those funds, we were able to fully obligate the funds to 60 different communities. And what we did with the funding is it allowed those communities to hire consultants, housing professionals, to determine what their housing needs are in their communities, and create new housing regulations to add to their zoning ordinances. New Hampshire Housing also received $10 million in capital grants from the Invest NH funds. With those grant dollars, we were able to leverage other funding, and we helped support the future development of 200 affordable rental units in the state of New Hampshire. There's also a special House committee on housing that's been created, and it's being chaired by Representative Joe Alexander to determine housing legislation. Joe Alexander is quite young, and he's very energized and focused on housing related issues. So I'm excited to see the change that happens through this new committee. Additionally, $5 million was set aside for a housing champion designation, and this funding will be available again to municipalities to adopt housing-friendly policies, and it also includes grants that incentivize participation and potential infrastructure grants. So this is right now in the BEA rulemaking process. So to talk a little bit more about housing solutions, additional funding and financing tools like Invest NH, the Affordable Housing Fund appropriation, are certainly needed, but they are not going to solve the crisis on their own. So unlike there was a bill that was introduced for a homeownership innovation fund, and unfortunately that was tabled, but unlike many of our surrounding states, New Hampshire did not appropriate funding for single family development, and the Invest NH and the Affordable Housing Fund don't really work well for that type of work. I get calls almost monthly from developers. People are interested in building starter homes, but there really is not funding available for them. And the way the zoning regulations are right now, most of the time it's financially infeasible to build a starter home. So changes to our zoning are absolutely needed. Some of the changes that are outlined in the housing needs assessment would be to develop model ordinances and technical assistance for local housing regulations. And so that work is being done through the HOP grants and through the housing champion designation. Incentivizing higher density developments, supporting local land use allowances for smaller homes, cottages, cottage courts, triplex, quadplex, mixed use developments like you see on the right-hand side of this screen. This is a property out in Rye that's being developed right now, workforce housing property by the Housing Partnership. Increased opportunity for accessory dwelling units, encouraging the conversion of commercial and office real estate into residential use, and also expanding manufactured housing development. And so the last slide I have for you is my Hope for Homeowners slide. So I run our homeownership team here at New Hampshire Housing, and so it's extremely challenging for people to buy a home and buy their first home. But there is still hope. So at New Hampshire Housing, we help hundreds of first-time home buyers get into their first home on an annual basis, and we've seen some success through home buyers leveraging our down payment assistance programs. So we have very generous down payment assistance programs, one that provides up to $10,000 in down payment assistance. We just recently launched a home first mortgage option that provides interest rates that are below market, and it could save a home buyer, around $300 a month on a $300,000 loan. We recommend evaluating different housing options. So looking at condos or 2 to 4 unit homes, manufactured housing, working with a skilled real estate team that can help you structure a competitive offer. Consider rate buy downs, but just be careful of adjustable rate mortgages or temporary buy downs where your mortgage payment will change on you in a couple of years. And then if your job allows, look at some geographic flexibility. So typically Southern New Hampshire and the 93 corridor are extremely expensive communities to purchase in, but we've seen a lot of success with people going outside of those communities to up and coming communities like Somersworth, Rochester, Claremont, or Berlin, to name a few. To find more information on our homeownership programs, please visit nhhomeownership.org. And on that website, we have all the information about our homeownership programs and a list of our participating lenders. Okay. And that is it for me. So I am going to switch this over to Bob Quinn. Bob Quinn is the Chief Executive Officer for the New Hampshire Realtors Association.
Thank you, Julie. Can you see my screen okay? Hopefully.
We can. It's just small.
Is it bigger now? Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Bob Quinn. I'm the CEO here at the New Hampshire Association of Realtors. Julie, this is going to be a tough act to follow. Just to make clear, the Realtors, we are 7,000 members statewide in every municipality, community in the state. I always like to tell folks that every Realtor is a licensed real estate agent, but not every licensed real estate agent is a Realtor. So I thought I'd maybe start off by kind of talking about public opinion. Unfortunately, we've had 2 polls that came out in the past couple of days on this issue. The first from our friends at the Center for Ethics and Society at St. Anselm's College, our friend Max Latana down there. They've been asking the same question now for 4 straight years, and that is, should New Hampshire towns and cities change their planning and zoning regs in order to allow more housing to be built? And as you can see, there has been a steady increase in support of that statement. I think most of it's probably coming from folks who maybe were indifferent early on and starting to recognize as median prices increase and availability decreases. But I think it's also important to note that there is still a strong, significant minority who disagree with this statement. Sometimes I feel like those in local and state government maybe are overrepresented from that group who disagree, but it's an important consideration because not everyone necessarily agrees that we're in a housing crisis. In addition, the University of New Hampshire just came out with a poll. Housing, number 1, 27% consider it the top issue the state is confronting. And in fact, if you add the issue of homelessness to that, you're over a third of registered voters indicating that housing is the most important issue. If you look down the bottom graph, you'll see this green line, similar to what St. A showed. Starting at about 2021, it starts to increase rather dramatically. I'll point out that in this poll, one of the interesting things in the crosstabs was the lowest number of folks who indicated housing was a problem with those between the ages of 35 and 49 years old. They indicate about 17% indicate it's the most important issue. First-time buyer average age nationally is 36. So it's the highest number, but one could argue that people are buying homes between the age of 35 and 49 and then saying, hey, housing's not as important as it once was when I didn't have it. So hold that thought because we're going to get back to that in a minute. I won't go too much into the details. Julie's already done it in terms of what the State House response has been to the issue. I'm just going to throw out, broadly speaking, a couple of different buckets. One is additional funding. And these dollars are critically important. They're targeted to the type of housing that's critically needed right now. But I also want to remind folks that we are not going to be able to use public funds and, in essence, fund our way out of this problem. If you have $30 million going towards housing in the state, let's say it's $25,000 per door on a development, and you're going to get about 1,200 units. It's probably a little simplistic way of looking at it, but it hopefully just illustrates that these dollars are critically important, but we need to do a lot more. Another bucket where the legislature has looked is in speeding up permitting and the appeals process. So they've worked to ensure that planning boards, ZBA, land use boards are having to process applications in a more speedier manner. Time is money for many folks, property owners who are looking to develop. They've also worked to simplify and speed up the appeal process, most importantly, the creation of the Housing Appeals Board. For those who are familiar with it, there is some opposition to this you hear in certain quarters. I would just strongly encourage folks. One thing interesting about the Housing Appeals Board is they publish all of their decisions on their website, unlike the Superior Court. So you can go in and you can read them. Property owners win some of them, towns win some of them. And I think it's important to note that some towns supported the creation of Housing Appeals Board because they wanted to get to an answer quicker. And certainly that has been the case. So Housing Appeals Board's really an important and innovative solution. And hat tip to Ben Frost at the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, who I think had a lot to do with that. In addition, this past year, the creation of a land use review docket at Superior Court, again, an attempt to try and speed up the process of a specific judge who will handle these cases. The difference is between the two, the land use review docket can look at commercial development as well. The Housing Appeals Board is limited just to housing. The third bucket maybe is the most important, and that's expanding private property rights. So I would look at the 2017, the last big one was the accessory dwelling units. And I think that's probably a model moving forward for the legislature. So in that situation, the state mandated on municipalities that they had to offer the ability for a property owner to put an accessory dwelling unit in a single family home, but they gave municipalities a great deal of leeway in determining how that is done. And I think that's a model moving forward. The state legislature is going to have to sort of make some determinations in the years to come. What role does the state have in ensuring the development of housing? Or is it exclusively a local decision done by municipalities? What impact does a local controlled decision, a local municipal decision, have on surrounding communities? Is that in the state's interest? Lastly, I'll just mention federal solutions. The National Association of Realtors has suggested a capital gains holiday. So what that would mean is a lot of folks, as we will see, and Julie has already pointed out, have created a lot of equity in their home over the past decades. And to sell it now might mean a significant capital gains hit. But if they were allowed or ability, maybe it's only to first-time home buyers, those who are buying it, if you're selling it, you would get some sort of reduction in your capital gain. So I think that would be a way in the near term to increase the number of homes that are available. So NHAR on a monthly basis publishes its housing affordability index. Right now it is at 62. That means that in New Hampshire, household income is 62% of what is necessary to qualify for the median priced home under prevailing interest rates. So that's the lowest we have seen since we've been doing this now for nearly 20 years. I will point out, and this will be sort of a trend, starting about a decade ago, this affordability index has been in steady decline. Yes, due to interest rates increasing. You see right here at the beginning of 2022, there is a drop. The yellow line is single family, blue is condos. But we were headed down anyway in the state. So it is certainly a concern. Part of that affordability is median sale price. Yeah, we calculate things a little bit differently than New Hampshire Housing Finance, but the real important thing is the trend. We have seen a steady increase in median sale price over the past decade. In New Hampshire, in July, the median sale price, so July 22 to July 23, increased 6.7%. Nationally, it was just 1.9%. So, as people, sometimes you'll hear, well, it's a national problem. It's nothing we can do to fix it. Well, there is an indication here, and also if you look at the second quarter, nationally, New Hampshire median sale price rose 4.5%, and the U.S. declined 2.3%. So maybe suggesting that things are a little bit different here in this part of the country. I'll also just point out, if you go back to 2012, median sale price, believe it or not, some might remember this, was about $215,000. If you just follow the CPI numbers, you would expect a home to be about today $300,000 in that range. Obviously, we're at about $480,000. So housing is increasing at a much more rapid rate than the cost of other goods and services. So again, kind of get at this, is New Hampshire a little bit unique? So these are July year over year. So this is comparing July of 22 to July 23 median sale price change. New Hampshire, we were up 6.7. Look at our neighbors, similar. Maine, a little lower, 6.5, Mass at 5.8. I will say that month to month, New Hampshire's median sale price is increasing slightly quicker than Massachusetts is, and that's been consistent for a number of months. You look at the bottom of the chart, Minnesota, Colorado. These are states which early on in the pandemic saw a very rapid rate of price increases as people sort of flocked out of cities into more rural areas. And that what we see, maybe there's an indication that that's kind of changing a little bit. I will mention that I use these states because they all use the same vendor that we do. So it's an apples to apples comparison. I will mention that Vermont reported, they don't use the same vendor, but Vermont reported their median sale price was about 7% in July. It was the only state I could find anywhere in the country that had a higher median sale price increase than New Hampshire in July. Looking at home price changes since the onset of COVID. So in New Hampshire, so that's 2020, first quarter of 2020 through 2023, New Hampshire median sale prices increased 45%. That's the 10th fastest in the country. Florida tops it out. It's important to note that of the top 10 states, New Hampshire has the current highest median sale price. It'll be kind of interesting to track this over the next year because I suspect that this will change. Florida is already sort of appearing to hit a ceiling in terms of median sale price while we are continuing to increase. So that's kind of a statewide view, but if you're more down into some municipalities, communities, you get an interesting sort of viewpoint. So this is blue is Portsmouth, black is Manchester, yellow is Nashua, red is Lebanon. This is a 6-month rolling average of home prices. So this is July 31st and the 6 months prior. We do this because communities on an individual month may not have that many closed sales. So you kind of want to look at a bigger picture than the trend. Portsmouth, prior to COVID, pretty consistent in terms of the median sale price. You hit COVID, prices start escalating very quickly. 500,000 median up to 854. Just consider the amount of equity that's being built up in these homes in Portsmouth. You bought before 2020 in Portsmouth, and you very well may have seen an increase in your wealth, $250,000. I also just want to point out Lebanon, and by the way, the same sort of trend exists in all of these cities. You know, Lebanon sort of bounced around median sale price between that of Manchester and Nashua, but over the past year, it's really kind of taken off. It has increased 10.4% in the past year. So a hot market, things increasing in Lebanon, and that may be possibly due to the fact that a lot of communities around Lebanon are not permitting any housing, while Lebanon has been pretty proactive in it. Hasn't been the case everywhere. There are communities in New Hampshire where you're starting to see median sale price taper off. So Candia down 12.5%, Amherst down 6%, Claremont down slightly, Hudson. There are other communities. I just randomly selected these communities, but again, Amherst started off at 400,000. They peaked at 640. So again, a $240,000 increase. But perhaps we're starting to see that in some communities we've reached a limit in terms of, but time will tell. This spring, again, mentioning the St. Anselm's and the Housing We Need project that they have with Max Lacon as the director. The New Hampshire Association of Realtors and St. A's did a joint housing event with realtors up in Plymouth. And we invited Dr. William Fischel, who's a professor up at Dartmouth College, who wrote a book about 20 years called The Homeowner Hypothesis. And what he basically says is that, maybe not that surprising, but when homeowners are participating in local government, what they look at primarily is the value of their own home. And they make judgments based upon how do I increase the value of my home in a lot of these municipal decision making. Some of those may believe that if they were able to keep supply of housing low in their community, then the equity in their home will increase. So they're sort of perhaps incentivized not to approve new housing. Is that always true? So I picked 4 communities here. This is a 3-month rolling average, a little bit different. So you see a little bit more wavy action in the graphs that I think generally people consider to be communities that have been proactive, and whether or not it's adding rental housing, condos, or single family homes. some communities who have been trying to meet the demand. Dover, Exeter, Bedford, and Lebanon. All of these states have seen their median sale price increase significantly, higher than the state average. State average is 4.5% during this period. You can see Lebanon up 10, Bedford 10. So while more housing is coming online, a lot of these communities are outstripping what some communities which are not providing housing in terms of median sale price. So something else to keep in mind for. So switching from median sales to closed sales. This year, on your left, you'll see year-to-date data. So we're down 20% in closed sales. Previous year, we were down 15%. So it's a significant drop in the number of closed sales. Now, to be fair, in 2020, we saw the highest number of closed sales. These are single-family homes in the state at 18,500. I think in March of 2020, if you told a lot of our realtor members that it was going to be the biggest year of all time, they would have laughed at you. A lot of them were anticipating potentially closing shop. So there has been a significant decline. If the 20%, and it's a big if that continues, then 2023 we'll see about 11,000 to 12,000 closed sales. You got to go back to the recessionary period. Lowest we've ever seen, 2008, there were 10,200 closed sales. So very different economy. Here you have large amounts of equity in people's homes. We're not seeing foreclosures. Unemployment is low. We're at 11, 10, 12,000 closed sales. I will just note that in Grafton County, again, if we're looking for some exceptions, closed sales are just down 2.6%. All of the counties, it's somewhere between 15 and 23. Uniquely, Lebanon, Plymouth, Littleton, closed sales are up year over year, looking back at a 6-month basis. So, and all three have seen significant median price increases. So more inventory does not necessarily depress median sale price because demand. So days on the market is a way we sort of look at what the demand is like. So it's the average number of days when a property is listed and when an offer is accepted. So 2023, a little better than 2022, but you can see historically very low. Again, similar trend lines. Point out the past 10 years, it wasn't just COVID. We've seen demand, days on market, slowly, steadily decrease. COVID may have acted as sort of an accelerant, but we were on that track anyway. So there has been a little uptick in the past year in terms of days on the market. And certainly, you talk to some realtors, they will tell you there are certain homes that still go on the sale on Friday, and by Monday, if it's priced properly, they're going to get 3 or 4 offers. The key thing is you got to price it properly. That's why you need to have a realtor. New Hampshire houses are selling the fastest in the country. So this is from Realtor.com. This is actually June data. So they have New Hampshire homes selling in 24 days. All New England states are in the top 10. But you can see New Hampshire is way out in front. Demand for housing in this state is enormous. It's a lack of supply, lack of inventory that's causing a lot of that. And we talk about supply, months supply of inventory. Julie mentioned it. We calculated this maybe a little bit differently. So yes, she mentioned 6 months as a balanced market. That's when buyers and sellers are kind of on equal footing in terms of any negotiation. We're down to 1.6 months single family housing inventory. So that's significant. But again, going back 10 years, there has been a steady decline in months supply of inventory in New Hampshire. We are now bouncing around the bottom for the past couple of years. And that's the key. What's going to happen in the years to come? Can we get that supply up? And if you do, then maybe you'll start to see some changes in pricing. Look at months inventory. We're at 1.6. Massachusetts is about the same. They're at 1.3, a little bit worse. United States, according to the National Association of Realtors, is at 3.3 months. So we have less than half the inventory if you look at the country as a whole, suggesting things are worse here than elsewhere. Just raw inventory of homes for sale. There are 1,700 homes for sale currently in New Hampshire. You go back just a few years, July, summertime, easily over 5,000, 6,000 homes. You know, you don't go back very far and you're over 7,500 homes, 1,700 right now. So policymakers can have a lot of say in where this chart goes. Do we continue to skip along the bottom? You know, obviously, if hopefully the Federal Reserve no longer keeps increasing interest rates, that obviously is going to impact the mortgage rates. But keep in mind that mortgage rates are pretty low here, and we still saw a steady decline in inventory in New Hampshire. We just don't have enough housing. Looked at this chart. Julie talked about permitting. I just compared Maine to New Hampshire. It's interesting, in 2019, it was about the same number of permits issued, and this is from the Census Bureau. Since then, Maine, steady increase in the number of permits. New Hampshire's been flat. Since 2019, Maine has permitted 5,500 more housing units than New Hampshire. New Hampshire needs to do a little better than that, I think. Quickly, this is just a chart of part of Rockingham County. So this is Rockingham County median sales, May 1 through July 31st. So this summer. And these are in each of the communities. These are median sale prices. Now imagine you're a couple, so you get good jobs. Maybe you have a family income of $150,000. You have a kid on the way. You have good jobs. Where are you looking to buy a house in Rockingham County? What is this going to mean for businesses in this part of the region when those younger workers are unable to find and afford a home? The typical age of a buyer, again, is 36 years old. That's an all-time high. And that's nationally. It's probably higher in New Hampshire. It's going to be higher in areas where housing prices are high. By the way, I looked at Newmarket because I thought, well, maybe Newmarket, but this is if I went back 6 months as opposed to just 3 months, this never actually jumps to 500,000. So very challenging for buyers. Again, looking at Rockingham County, if you look at closed sales under $400,000 during that same time period, total in all of Rockingham County, not just what I've listed here, there were 73 homes sold out of 726 that were under $400,000. Could have been $399. And you can look at the numbers. I mean, there are no homes in many of these communities that were sold for under $400,000. So first-time home buyers are really getting squeezed with this housing. And I do think it is important for the state to recognize that oftentimes those are the workers that we're trying to attract. Businesses are trying to attract. Where are they going to live? So our chief economist, the National Association of Realtors, he says that homeowners have a net worth about 40 times higher than that of renters. If this younger generation's unable to afford a home, to buy a home, long term, they're going to be less wealthy. We talked about some of the communities, Portsmouth, just over the past couple of years, the fortunate situation they're going to have in terms of wealth building, generational wealth. So it's a big issue and a big problem. I think it's probably worthwhile, and I'll be real quick here, talk about some of the pushback that we hear from folks, from communities. So the belief that housing leads to more kids in the community, and you have to educate them, so therefore your taxes are higher. And I'm going to quickly mention something on the next slide on that one. Ruins rural characteristics of New Hampshire. I think, though, that it's sort of in the eye of the beholder. If you're allowed to build more densely, build 20 homes on, just a few acres versus those same 20 homes over 40, 50 acres, what is protecting New Hampshire's rural character more? Lowers value of surrounding property owners. So this is, again, kind of going back to the Dartmouth professor's argument. I think when people believe this, and in fact, this past session in the State House, we had a state rep on the floor of the House say that she was voting against a specific bill because she felt it was going to lower the value of her own property. The data on that is highly suspect. I think that people are often surprised what happens in a community. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that you have a new apartment building nearby that might actually increase the value of your home. So it's worthwhile diving into. And of course, you always hear people say, hey, I moved here to get away from people and live in a more rural area. But it's, again, I'm moving to New Hampshire. No one else can come in behind me since I'm here now. We have at NHAR tried to rebut some of those. We've put together a couple of videos. One has to do with the correlation myth between kids and schools. We studied all communities in New Hampshire, their education tax rate and school enrollment, and found that there's no correlation between the two. So we've got a video there. We also have a video on what is workforce and affordable housing. People make up a definition of it, but it's important to keep in mind that that definition of both is actually in the state statute. And again, people are often surprised to find out what those definitions lead to, because oftentimes it leads to the house they're living in right now is defined as affordable. So you can find those at nhar.org, scrolling about halfway. And with that, I want to thank you. If you have any questions for me afterwards, my email is bob@nhar.com. Ernesto, I guess back to you.
Thank you. That was amazing, Bob and Julie. Julie, please come on back as well. If you could restart your video and your audio. We have about 10 minutes here, and we have quite a few questions. So we'll kind of treat these questions a little bit like a speed round and see how many of them we can get to. I want to start with a couple that came in by email prior to this, when people saw that they could pre-submit questions. We talked about a couple. Actually, before I even start with that, the main one that I want to start with first is whether or not you're both comfortable sharing these slides with folks, because we've had several requests in the chat for a copy of the slides.
Absolutely.
Yep, I'm happy to.
Okay, great. And then also for folks in the audience, know that we will be making a recording of today's presentation available on nhbr.com for you to share with folks as well. So you can both have that. We'll send out the slides, and you can listen to a recording of this or share this with your colleagues and constituents. First question that we had was that came in by email was whether or not you see whether there's any program for the state to develop housing on state-owned land, either by donation or by providing concessionary long-term leases, et cetera. And Julie, I think you were going to tackle that one.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So there is an RSA that exists. It's RSA 204D, and that outlines the disposition process for state-owned land. And so it is documented. New Hampshire Housing and or the municipality does have first right of refusal for state-owned land that is going through a disposition process. And so we have in the past, there have been a few projects that have been developed on state-owned land. One specifically that's in Hampton Falls, a multifamily project that was developed a few years back. And so we are currently working with the Department of Transportation to work on the notification process and how that would work, try to streamline that. And so I think more to come here. It's something that we're looking into, trying to figure out how that process would work, and then how New Hampshire Housing could help facilitate that into housing development.
Great, thank you. One other one that had come in by email: what role do you see manufactured homes, specifically those in resident-owned communities, playing in solving our housing crisis?
So manufactured housing is, some of the only remaining affordable housing out there right now. And so I guess the secret's out. People know about it, and even manufactured home prices are increasing pretty rapidly, but there are still deals out there in resident-owned communities, and there's mortgages available. So the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund provides mortgages, and then New Hampshire Housing has a resident-owned community lending program through our Fannie Mae programs. It's a conventional loan product. So the financing for those mortgages is available, but I think it certainly provides a solution, because there are a lot of units in resident-owned communities that could be used for infill purposes. And so we have been working with the Community Loan Fund by providing grants and down payment assistance to look at these resident-owned communities and figure out how to get homes placed in unit or on the pads that are vacant. And so I think there's an opportunity, and it seems like kind of like the low-hanging fruit of housing development because they're already permitted.
Bob, any other comment on that?
So just speed round. We take an all the above position. So whether or not it's rental properties, apartments, condos, single family homes, manufactured homes, accessory dwelling units, the state needs more of all of those. It's not to say that communities, government doesn't have a critical role to ensure the health and safety when permitting these. Absolutely 100%. But we also have to keep in mind that zoning laws, when they were created, were designed to simply keep industrial uses, commercial uses away from residential uses. I think over the past 40 years, that has really changed significantly, especially in New Hampshire and in New England. And I think that generally we would like to see a little bit more going back to private property rights and the ability of somebody who owns property to utilize it in the way that they best see fit.
Okay. Question that related to education funding, and maybe this ties into some of the opposition that you flagged at the end of your presentation, Bob. Has discussion of education funding been considered as a contributing factor to the shortage of housing?
I don't know if Julie wants. Well, so I will just say that, not to reiterate what I said during the presentation, but we do hear quite a bit this concern that if housing comes in, you're going to see kids coming into the community, and then they got to educate them, so your property taxes go up. Now, in almost every single community in the state of New Hampshire, enrollment in schools has decreased. Most of the costs that you're going to see a school has are fixed costs. The carrying costs of that school, utilities, even transportation costs aren't going to change much if you see 10 more kids come into the school district. So I do think that sometimes municipalities make knee-jerk responses to that concern that I think it would be worthwhile to explore a little bit deeper.
To that point, and I don't know this as well as my colleagues know it, but a component of the Invest in H, the HOP allocation that New Hampshire Housing received, had a component for education, and they called that the Housing Academy. And so there was a training component tied to it where the grantees could send up to 3 members of the municipality to this. It seems like a pretty comprehensive training program, and that's been going on throughout the year. There is information on our website available for that training program. I can send it in the chat, and then maybe we can distribute it to the participants here.
Great, thank you. That would be excellent. We'd be happy to send that out. Keeping going on the speed round here, we're at the top of the hour, but maybe we can go a couple minutes over. Is that okay with both of you? We'll go to 5 after and get a couple more of these in. Is there any data about the effect of short-term rental on housing availability, Airbnb and so forth?
So I can jump into that one. So there is some data on that we've certainly seen. There was a study that was done a couple of years ago out of Harvard. Then they looked at Boston and New York. They found that prevalence of short-term rentals might increase rental rates about 3%. But keep in mind that those markets are a little bit different. Lots of apartments in Boston, New York. You don't find that in places like Conway and elsewhere. New Hampshire has historically had a higher percentage of second homes than almost any other state. It fluctuates depending on what the Census Bureau would you look at, but even actually go back to the early 70s, there were more second homes than there are now. And they're all different types. They're not just the large mansions that you might see on some of our lakes. They can be seasonal cottages spread out throughout New Hampshire. So, I think that sometimes people sort of attribute a greater impact on short-term rentals. And keep in mind, most people who are doing short-term rentals, the majority of them, they are doing it on a part-time basis. So in other words, they may rent it out for 30 days out of the year, maybe 3 months out of the year, but they're utilizing it the rest of the time. So single-family homes are not necessarily, we don't think, the answer to the rental problem. You're going to want to see more apartments.
Okay. How are you considering? Are you continuing, Bob, to see a large number of cash buyers in the market?
So we don't track that specifically here, but nationally it's about, it fluctuates between 25 and maybe a little bit less than 30% of buyers are cash. And you can see, if you're from, and Julie had a great slide that sometimes, again, we sort of overemphasize how many out-of-state buyers are coming into New Hampshire. But if you're from a suburb of Boston, and you're able to sell your house now, median sale price down there is probably, can be 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million dollars. You're coming in with a lot of cash. So now you might see a home in New Hampshire that's 600,000. Cash is king. Generally, if a buyer is competing with let's say a first-time buyer with a cash buyer is going to win, because the seller is going to see that as a safer option for them. So it is still a significant issue for folks.
If the Fed raises the interest rates again in November, what do you have a prediction on where that leaves housing for inventory and sales?
Well, I don't have a personal prediction. I'll leave it to Julie, but I will tell you that the National Association of Realtors, Lawrence Yunes, chief economist, has indicated that as long as there's not another interest rate increase after September, he does think that by spring of next year, maybe the end of spring, early summer, we could start to see mortgage rates closer to 5%, somewhere between 5 and 5.5%. So that would certainly be good news. I think one of the issues we haven't talked about is sort of this notion that a lot of folks are locked into their mortgage. Homeowners do not want to trade away their low interest rate for a higher rate. So they might have more house than that they need or they want right now, but they have a great mortgage rate. Maybe it's 2-3%. They don't want to trade that for a 7% interest rate.
Okay, well, that brings us to 12:05. Any final things that either of you wanted to make in terms of points before we let everybody go here today? And thank you so much. It's been fascinating.
No, I just want to take the opportunity to just reiterate that I think New Hampshire Housing has great homeownership programs, and there's a lot of people out there that still want to buy, and they should, take a look at our website, take a look at our homeownership programs. Our new program that's funded with mortgage revenue bonds provides stability to interest rate hikes, and that's really important for home buyers right now. And so, yeah, I guess I just want to keep the hope alive for these people who are looking to buy a home.
Real quick, we believe that the solution to our housing crisis is expanding private property rights. Put the power back in the hands of property owners, individuals, to make these sorts of decisions, and let them meet the demand. It's something that government just not going to be able to do.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Julie. Once again, a tremendous amount of data that you presented today. Really compelling, and we appreciate you both. Thank you to New Hampshire Housing for sponsoring this webinar. I am Ernesto Burden, the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review. It's been our pleasure to host you today. Thank you to all of you who turned out and hung around until the end. Have a great day, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Fine. Thank you.